What if the man you helped on a rainy morning turned out to be one of the wealthiest people in the country? What if your one small act of kindness, just $5, quietly rewrote the rest of your life? In a quiet corner of the city, a waitress named Claire made a choice that no one else dared to make. She didn't do it for recognition. She didn't know she was being watched, and she had no idea that the soaked, humiliated man she stood up for was a billionaire in disguise. This isn't a story about falling in love with a rich man. It's a story about being seen, about dignity, courage, and what it means to change a life with nothing but kindness. Stay with us, because this journey starts with one cup of coffee and ends with a legacy no one saw coming. It was the kind of morning that makes the city feel like it's holding its breath. Rain streaked down the wide café windows, blurring the outside world into a moving watercolor. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the dampness of pavement and wool coats. Customers murmured over laptops and lattes, cocooned in the illusion of normalcy. Then, the door swung open. A gust of wind swept through, cold and sharp. In walked a man, mid-50s, soaked to the bone. His coat was thin, frayed at the sleeves. His shoes left muddy trails across the floor. Drops of water clung to his salt and pepper hair, his eyes dull with exhaustion. He didn't belong here. Not in this trendy downtown spot with its curated playlists and expensive espresso. Still, he approached the counter. His voice was barely audible. "Just a black coffee, please." The young barista, all sharp lines and sharper tone, rang it up. "That'll be $2.75. The man reached into his pockets, one, then the other. His fingers fumbled, movements growing frantic. His shoulders tightened. I think I left my wallet," he said, voice tight with shame. "Could I maybe just sit a while? Until the rain stops?" The barista folded his arms. Loud enough for everyone to hear, he replied, "Look, buddy, this isn't a shelter. No money, no coffee, no seat." Laughter rippled from a nearby table. 3 customers in tailored coats, sipping cold brew with curled lips. "Imagine that," one of them said. "Coming into a cafe broke and expecting service. Next thing you know," another snorted, "he'll be asking for a croissant." The man stepped back, his gaze fixed on the tile floor, as if trying to disappear into it. His cheeks flushed. "I wasn't asking for anything free," he murmured. "Just somewhere dry." He turned toward the door, and that's when Claire Monroe moved, a 29-year-old waitress, auburn hair tucked messily in a ponytail, tray in hand, had been watching the whole scene from across the room. Her hazel eyes, usually soft, were burning now. She set the tray down with a clatter, reached into her apron pocket, and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. "That's enough," she said, her voice slicing clean through the noise. The barista blinked. "Claire, what are you doing?" "I'm covering his coffee," she replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not because he asked, but because I've been there, judged for not having enough." Another customer scoffed from the corner. "How noble. Waitress wants to be a hero now." Claire turned to face the room. Her posture was calm but unshakable. "Kindness isn't a transaction," she said. "It doesn't cost you dignity. But mocking someone who's struggling, that does." And just like that, the cafe went quiet. Even the music seemed to fade. Claire turned to the man and smiled softly. "Please sit. I'll bring your coffee over." He looked at her, eyes shining, not with gratitude, but with something older, something that remembered what it felt like to be human. He nodded and took a seat by the window, where the rain kept falling. By the time Claire cleared the last table of her shift, the man by the window was long gone. No one said thank you. No one clapped. The cafe had returned to its usual rhythm, cups clinking, machines hissing, small talk echoing off walls that remembered too little. But Claire felt the change in the air. People avoided her gaze. Conversations dimmed when she walked past. There were no insults, just silence. Heavy, deliberate silence. The next morning, her manager called her into the office. The room smelled like burnt coffee and cleaning bleach. Claire stood just inside the doorway as Derek, her manager, crossed his arms and stared. "Close the door," he said flatly. She did. "This is a business, Claire," he began. "Not your personal charity project." She said nothing. "You don't get to decide who gets free stuff," he snapped. "If you want to play Mother Teresa, do it off the clock. I paid for it." She replied calmly. "That's not the point." Derek's voice rose. "You made the barista look bad. You made our customers uncomfortable." Claire's voice didn't flinch. "He made himself look bad." Derek's eyes narrowed. "Don't test me. You're here to serve, not to lecture people." A pause, tension thick as steam. "Can I go?" Claire asked. "Get out," he said, "and remember your place." She left the office, head held high. In the back kitchen, two of her co-workers, Sophie and Tyler, stood by the sink, their conversation dying the moment she entered. As she passed, Sophie muttered just loud enough, "Must be nice acting like a saint when you still split rent with your sick sister." Tyler chuckled. "Bet she thinks he was some secret millionaire." Claire said nothing. She grabbed her coat, signed out, and stepped into the soft drizzle outside. The city was gray, blurred, quieter than usual. But she didn't rush. She walked home. The apartment she shared with her sister Mia was small, barely more than a box. One bedroom, peeling paint. A window that whistled every time the wind passed by. Mia lay curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket too thin for the season. Her breathing was shallow, the wheeze of someone used to being sick. "Hey," Claire whispered, brushing her forehead. "You're late," Mia murmured. Claire smiled, warm but tired. "Got caught in the rain." She reheated some old porridge, added a pinch of salt, and sat beside her sister as she ate. Later, Claire opened her wallet. 3 crumpled dollar bills, 1 subway token, a fading photo of their mother. She stared at the contents for a long moment, then slid them back in and zipped it shut. No regret, not for the coffee, not for the silence, not even for the job that now felt colder. That night, Claire sat by the window. The city lights danced in the rain. Her reflection stared back, pale, worn, but steady. And then, memory came. 15 years ago. Her mother collapsed in a street market. People walked around them like they were invisible. All but one woman, old, poor, wearing a patched skirt, who knelt beside them and offered water with trembling hands. Claire never learned her name, but she remembered what it felt like to matter. That's why, when she saw the man in the café, soaked, ashamed, made to feel like nothing, she didn't hesitate. It wasn't pity, it was a promise kept. And before she turned off the light that night, she whispered to the dark, "I'd rather be mocked for doing the right thing than praised for staying silent." 4 days had passed since the incident, 4 long shifts filled with half-heard whispers and glances that lingered like smoke. Claire had learned to live with invisibility, but now she was visible for something she hadn't asked for, and somehow that felt heavier than the silence ever had. That morning, the cafe buzzed as usual, cups clinking, steam hissing, background chatter floating like white noise. Claire moved from table to table, wiping crumbs, stacking plates, refilling mugs. Her face was composed, her steps automatic. Then, the bell above the door chimed. She didn't look up right away, but something changed. The air shifted, like gravity had tilted slightly, and every pair of eyes turned toward something or someone they couldn't ignore. Claire glanced toward the entrance. A tall man stepped inside. He wore a charcoal suit, a silk scarf draped around his neck. His polished shoes tapped softly across the floor, and his salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back. He looked like a man who belonged in a boardroom, somewhere high above the city, in a tower of glass. But Claire saw something else. His eyes, those eyes, the same weary, haunted eyes that had stared down at the tile floor just days earlier. He didn't go to the counter. He didn't speak. He walked to the same seat by the window, the one where he had sat soaked and humiliated, and quietly took it. Claire froze. She clutched the cloth in her hand so tightly her knuckles went white. Her heart thudded in her chest, like a drumbeat she couldn't silence. What was he doing here? Was this a joke? A setup? Slowly, she approached the table, menu in hand. But before she could say anything, he looked up. "I'm not here to order," he said softly. Claire stopped. "I only have one question," he added. "Why did you help me?" She blinked. I just couldn't watch it happen," she answered, her voice unsure, trembling slightly. "You didn't look like someone asking for a handout. You looked like someone being made to feel small." She hesitated. "And I know that feeling." She sat down across from him, setting the menu aside. "When I was 17, she said quietly, "my mom collapsed in a crowded market. People just walked around us, like we were in the way, like we didn't belong. Except for one woman, an old woman with barely anything herself. She stayed with us, wrapped me in her shawl. I never forgot that." The man said nothing. He just listened. "That day," Claire continued, "when I saw you, I remembered that promise, that I'd be like her, if I ever got the chance." A pause. Then his voice, smooth and thoughtful. "Do you read?" Claire blinked. "Books?" He nodded. "I used to. Not so much anymore. I liked stories about ordinary people doing brave things." She smiled faintly. "Good choice." They talked about books, cities, composers, Bach, Chopin, about why people become cruel when they feel powerless. Claire didn't pretend to know things she didn't. She answered with curiosity, not performance. Minutes passed, then more. The café around them faded into background hum. At one point, Claire laughed. Really, laughed for the first time in days. "You're not what I expected," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" "Someone who just wanted to say thank you and disappear." He looked down, then met her eyes again. "I've had wealth for a long time," he said, "but very few people have made me feel human again. That day, you did." Claire didn't speak. She didn't need to. For a moment, they were just two people, not a waitress and a billionaire, not a savior and a stranger. Just two souls, finally seen. Exactly 1 week after that conversation, Claire received an envelope. No return address. Just her name written in crisp, formal print. Inside, a heavy ivory card, embossed with gold. It was an invitation. From the Aninsley Grand, a 5-star hotel more known for hosting diplomats and CEOs than waitresses from downtown cafes. Her name stood alone at the top. Claire Monroe, guest of Jonathan Reed. She stared at it for a long time. The gold seal shimmered in the afternoon light like a dare. She almost didn't go. But something in her, equal parts curiosity and fear, pushed her through the doors 3 days later. She wore her best blouse, shoes borrowed from her roommate, and held her breath as the concierge directed her to a private lounge on the 21st floor. The lounge was silent, draped in velvet and soft jazz. The skyline stretched behind glass like a dream no one invited her to enter. And then the door opened. Jonathan Reed stepped in, not the man in a coat dripping with rain, not the man in the suit from the cafe. This man radiated something different. Presence. Power. That didn't shout, didn't command, but simply existed. He sat across from her and folded his hands. "I wanted to tell you in person," he began, "because anything less would be dishonest." She waited. "My name," he said, "is Jonathan Reed. I'm the founder of Reed Holdings. We work in 12 countries. Infrastructure, social impact." Claire's lips parted slightly. Her mind tried to catch up. "I wasn't pretending to be someone else," he said, "but that morning, I dressed down. I didn't bring my wallet. On purpose." A pause. "I needed to know what people see when there's nothing to gain." Claire stared at the tea in front of her, unsure whether to feel honored or played. "My wife passed away 15 years ago," he continued, quieter now. "Cancer, sudden. We never had kids. After that, I stopped trusting people, stopped believing. Kindness was real." He looked up. "I began traveling. Quietly. Privately. Just to see the world, and see who still lived with heart." He looked at her. Straight into her. "That day," he said, "I found someone." Claire swallowed. Her throat felt tight. "You set me up," she whispered. "No," he replied gently. "I didn't ask for anything. I didn't even speak. I just watched, and you chose." Claire shook her head. "I don't know if I should feel grateful or manipulated." Jonathan nodded. "I understand that, I really do." Claire stood, her chair scraping softly. "So what now?" she asked. "You tell me I passed your morality test, and then what? You offer me a job, a check, a car?" He didn't flinch. "I offer you nothing, unless you choose to hear me out." Claire's breath came unevenly. She didn't know what was real anymore, but deep inside something told her. This wasn't about money or power or even redemption. It was about something rarer, someone somewhere searching for humanity and recognizing it in her. Claire didn't expect to hear from Jonathan again. She thought maybe their strange, surreal encounter at the hotel had been the end, like closing the last page of a story she was never supposed to be part of. But the very next afternoon, another envelope arrived. No gold embossing this time, no hotel logos or heavy parchment. Just her name, written in careful penmanship. Inside was a single note. "Claire, I'm heading to Montreal next week. I go every year. It's quieter there. I'd like you to come, not for business, not for formality, just company, just conversation. No expectations. Only a sincere invitation." Jonathan tucked inside was a round-trip train ticket. She held it in her hands for a long time. That night, in the small kitchen of her apartment, Claire stood over the stove, watching rice simmer in a dented pot. Her sister Mia sat bundled in blankets on the couch, coughing softly between sips of tea. "You're quiet," Mia said. Claire gave a faint smile. "That's rare, huh? You thinking about him?" She nodded, then told Mia everything, about the invitation, the ticket, the feeling like a door had cracked open. A door she never dared to knock on before. "I don't know if I belong in his world," Claire admitted. "What if I embarrass myself? What if it changes the way he sees me?" Mia studied her for a moment, then spoke with quiet clarity. "You've spent your whole life making space for others. Maybe it's time to see what it feels like when someone makes space for you." Claire couldn't sleep that night. She lay awake listening to the city's heartbeat, buses humming below, rain tapping at the window, the soft ticking of the old wall clock. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, who used to say, "Don't wait for life to come find you. Sometimes you have to go find it yourself." By morning, her decision was made. She packed light, a single bag, her worn journal, 2 changes of clothes, and the book she'd been too tired to finish for months. She left grocery money on the fridge with a note for Mia and gave her a hug that lingered longer than usual. At the train station, Claire stood on the platform, heart caught between hesitation and hope. When the train arrived and the doors hissed open, she stepped forward, not into luxury, not into fantasy, but into the unknown. Jonathan was waiting in the cabin, no bodyguards, no polished entourage. Just him, sitting by the window, a paperback in his lap and 2 coffees on the table. He looked up and smiled, not the refined smile of a man used to being served. Something warmer, something real. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. Claire sat across from him, gently setting her bag on the floor. "I didn't think I would either," she replied. "But then I remembered something." He tilted his head. "The world doesn't change unless you walk into it." Jonathan nodded slowly, like the words settled somewhere deep in his chest. "I'm not offering anything," he said. "No promises. No golden road. I just thought maybe it's time I stopped walking alone." The train began to move. The city blurred into forest, then fields. Claire looked out the window, then back at him. "Maybe we both needed someone to remind us we're still allowed to choose something different." They didn't speak for a while after that, and somehow it didn't feel awkward. It felt necessary. What followed was nothing like what Claire imagined the life of a billionaire would be. No 5-star hotels, no champagne brunches, no yachts. Instead, there were dusty towns, modest guest houses, and local diners where no one cared what your net worth was. They rode in the back of Jonathan's old Jeep, wind in their hair, music humming softly through crackling speakers. In the outskirts of one city, they visited an orphanage. Children ran to Jonathan, shouting his name, not because he gave them gifts, but because he remembered their birthdays, their favorite colors, their jokes. They went to shelters where recovering addicts sat in circles, and Jonathan didn't talk much. He listened. And when he did speak, he spoke with the humility of someone who knew pain up close. They sat on porches of half-built homes funded by his foundation, though his name was nowhere to be found. They ate soup made by grateful strangers who had no idea the man across from them owned half the skyline. Claire watched all of this in quiet awe. He never introduced himself as anything more than Jonathan. He never sought praise. She asked him once, while they sorted boxes in a food pantry, "In Vermont, why don't you tell people who you are?" He shrugged, "Because they'd stop talking to me like I'm human." And everywhere they went, Claire noticed the same thing. His eyes weren't searching for attention, they were searching for connection. And more than once, she caught her own reflection in the window, not the tired waitress, but a woman smiling, like she hadn't in years. One night, in a quiet cabin nestled at the edge of a forest in Quebec, they sat on a porch as the crickets sang and pine-scented air clung to the silence. A single lantern flickered on the table between them. Jonathan brewed chamomile tea. Claire curled into a blanket, watching the steam rise from her cup. They hadn't spoken in a while, but it wasn't the silence of strangers, it was the silence of people who didn't need to fill the space to feel understood. Finally, Jonathan leaned back in his chair. "I've had people offer me everything," he said. "Comfort, companionship, even love." He paused, then turned toward her, his voice quieter now. "But I don't need someone to love me. I need someone who understands why I love the things I do. Someone who doesn't need to be dazzled, just present." Claire didn't answer right away. She let the words settle. Then she looked at him, eyes reflecting both lantern light and something deeper. "I don't know if I'm that person," she said honestly. "I don't know if I understand all the reasons why you are who you are." She took a breath. "But I know this. I've never felt more like myself than I do when I'm with you." Jonathan didn't smile, didn't look victorious. He simply looked peaceful, as if he'd just heard the answer he didn't know he'd been waiting for. They didn't hold hands. They didn't move closer. Because what they shared wasn't about proximity. It was about recognition. Two souls, shaped by hardship, finally seen in the quiet space between their scars. 3 months passed, not with headlines or grand gestures, but with quiet mornings and unhurried conversations. With community centers instead of penthouses, soup kitchens instead of hotel suites. Claire changed, but not in the way most would expect. She didn't dress differently. She wasn't suddenly wealthy. Her shoes were still worn at the edges, her journals still filled with messy handwriting and folded corners. But her spirit, that had shifted. She walked straighter, spoke with more pause, and no longer felt the need to explain her worth to anyone. Jonathan noticed it too. One evening, after a visit to a women's shelter in Detroit, he asked to speak with her privately. They sat on the rooftop terrace of a converted church his foundation was helping rebuild. Behind them, the city skyline glowed like a horizon of possibility. He handed her a folder. No ribbon, no ceremony, just a name stamped on the front. The Claire Monroe Opportunity Fund. Inside were legal documents, a foundation, established in her name. She stared at it, silent. "I want to leave something behind," Jonathan said softly. "But not in my name. I've done enough of that." He leaned forward. "I want the next girl. The one waiting tables, taking care of her sister, thinking no one sees her. I want her to know someone did." Claire said nothing at first. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the folder. "You don't have to run it," he added. "You don't even have to be involved. But it will exist, because you did. Because you chose to see someone for who they were, not what they had." She looked up slowly. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. But she did. She took a long breath, one that came from deep inside her, clear and steady. "I'm honored," she said. "More than I can say. But if it's all right, I'd like to try something different." He tilted his head, listening. "I want to build something on my own, not with your name, not with mine. I want to start from the ground up. Not because I don't value this, because I do. But because someone once believed in me enough to let me believe in myself." Her voice didn't waver. "And now, I want to offer that same belief to others. Not through money, through presence, through showing up when no one else does." Jonathan was silent. Then he smiled, not with surprise, but with the quiet pride of someone who had always known this moment would come. "You already have," he said. Claire looked at him, not as the man who had once sat trembling in a café, not as a billionaire, but as something else, her mirror, her mentor, her friend. There was no label for what they were, not lovers, not business partners, not even family. But something more enduring, a kind of soul recognition, a shared truth that didn't need definition. He reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "No matter what you do," he said, "I'll always be in your corner." She nodded, and in that moment, nothing more needed to be said. Because their story was never built on grand gestures. It was built on quiet choices. On trust, and on the courage to let each other grow. The rain had returned. Soft, steady, familiar. It tapped gently against the windows of the café that now bore no name above the door, only a single phrase etched into the glass. No one should have to earn kindness. Claire stood, across the street, umbrella in hand, watching through the misty morning as the last letter of the sign was pressed into place. This wasn't just a café, it was the café, the one where it all began. Where a soaked man once stood, embarrassed, humiliated, clutching empty pockets. Where a waitress with nothing to spare had offered $5 and unknowingly changed her life. Now the floors had been refinished, The lights rewired, the walls repainted by volunteers. The shelves lined with second-hand books, the air filled with soft jazz and the aroma of fresh brewed hope. Inside, the chalkboard behind the counter didn't show prices. It read, "Your first cup is on us. Your second, if you can, on someone else." Claire stepped through the doors. It was warm inside, warmer than she remembered. Every table was different, mismatched on purpose. Each bore a handwritten word instead of a number. Hope, trust, begin. She walked past an exhausted nurse sipping tea, a delivery driver rubbing his hands by the heater, a young mom bouncing her baby on her knee, and then the door opened. A man stepped in, older, hunched. His coat clung to him, soaked and trembling. He stood awkwardly at the entrance, dripping quietly onto the mat. The young barista at the counter, new, eager, unsure, looked. "Up, sir. This place is for customers only. If you don't have—" Before he could finish, Claire crossed the floor and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's all right," she said softly. Then turning to the man, she smiled. "Would you like a seat by the window?" He nodded, almost afraid to accept. "What would you like today?" she asked. He looked down. "Just something warm," he whispered. "It's been a long morning." Claire nodded. Her voice was a balm. "Then let's make it longer, with a little peace." She glanced back at the barista. "Here, the first cup is always on us. No questions, no shame." The young man swallowed his words. The older man smiled, barely believing. He walked slowly toward the table by the window and sat, just like someone else once had. Claire felt something tug at her. She turned to the front window, and there he was. Across the street, standing beneath a black umbrella, was Jonathan. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He just stood there, coat collar turned up, eyes warm, calm. Their eyes met through the glass. In that moment, something passed between them. Gratitude, farewell, and something else, a promise. He nodded once, then turned and disappeared into the rain. Later that day, during the soft opening, Claire stood beside the old upright piano near the corner, a warm cup of coffee in one hand, a microphone in the other. The café was full, shoulder to shoulder, but the air wasn't loud. It was reverent, as if everyone sensed that this place somehow meant more than coffee. Claire looked around, at every table, every face, every pair of eyes waiting, curious. She took a deep breath. "Years ago," she began, her voice calm but full, "I paid for a man's coffee. I didn't know his name, I didn't know his story, I didn't even know if he'd drink it." She smiled slightly. "All I knew was that he looked small, and I knew what that felt like. So I did what I could." She paused. "That cup cost me $5, but it gave me something I didn't know I was missing, a new way to see the world." Some in the crowd nodded. Others wiped their eyes. "I thought I was helping a man who was lost," she said. "But the truth is, he helped me find the version of myself I didn't know I was allowed to become." She set the cup down beside the mic. "This cafe, it's not about selling coffee. It's about presence, about choosing to show up when no one else does." Her voice softened. "A man once told me, kindness doesn't need to be remembered. It only needs to be continued." She looked toward the door, then to the window where the rain still whispered down the glass. "So that's what we're doing here, one cup at a time." She took one last look at the room. Some kinds of love don't need romance. Some lives change, not with miracles, but with a single quiet gesture, and the courage to mean it. The room erupted into applause, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that builds, grows, swells with something unspoken. A saxophone began to play softly. In the back, a barista poured a fresh cup for a woman who looked like she hadn't been noticed in days. And somewhere near the window, a child laughed. A tired nurse exhaled. A delivery driver leaned back and closed his eyes, and so it began again. Claire didn't set out to change the world. She didn't have a plan, a sponsor, or a platform. All she had was $5. And a refusal to stay silent. And that was enough. Voiceover final line for YouTube CTA. If this story touched you, made you think, or reminded you that compassion still matters, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, another soul is waiting to be seen, and you might just be the next cup that changes everything.